Hello, so good morning. I wanted to follow up with last week's poll. So more than two-thirds of you said that you're using LLMs for building data pipelines. We tried to tackle it last year, so I want to give you some tips. First, we can split the problem into two parts. One is extracting the parameters, and the other is actually building the source. So the parameters that I'm talking about is the documentation of the API. I made a list with all the pieces of information that you actually need to build your pipeline. So this is base URL, endpoints, authentication, pagination. All of these things you can typically find in the web documentation. Now, response data path, dependencies for chained calls, primary keys, incremental strategy, many of these pieces of information are not actually available in documentations. So this makes it a hard problem because you need to kind of infer them. And sometimes you also have stuff like rate limits or other gotchas that you need to worry about. So basically, to solve the parameter extraction problem, what we did last year is we created an open API generator. So open API is basically a spec that you might have heard of Swagger. It's that. It's basically to help define, it's a standard that, let's say, tells people how to build APIs. And it is also then used to document the API, to generate documentation, for example. So if you have this spec, it's a YAML file, then you can, or JSON file, then you can extract the information that you need from it, and you can build your pipeline. But of course, some information like primary keys or incremental strategy will never be in the documentation. So for the purposes of this video, because I want to show you how to do it, I looked at how can we most easily do this. So I would say the easiest is if I actually created a list of parameters from an API and I gave it to an LLM and I said, hey, please build a source with these. That would go easy, but this would be work for me. I don't have this. So next best thing would be if we had some kind of open API spec. But like I said, the open API spec will not have information, for example, about incremental strategy. Gold standard would be, if our LLM could understand everything from the docs and then try and figure out the remaining parts. And then if it couldn't, flag anything that wasn't solved to the human so the human can do the last mile. Realistically, we're not there yet. So what I did for this purpose was I took an Airbyte source, which is YAML, which contains also the, let's say, primary keys and incremental strategies. So I'll show you now, and basically I will try to convert this to a Python pipeline. So let me share my screen. So I prepared a Cursor project, and in Cursor you have here a settings button. If you click this, you can configure your project essentially. So I'm just using a free trial. And in features, I added documentation. So something that I can already help you with is basically when you're adding documentation, sometimes the documentation is not LLM optimal and LLMs will not understand them. So as you can see, I manually added the REST API documentation as well. So this is a local file while the other stuff is online. I also added Airbyte documentation for the Airbyte source. And let me show you this document. So basically the problem that I had was that the LLM was able to write the source's code, but it wasn't able to use our REST API source, I think for pagination or something. No, incremental. It wasn't able to figure that out. So what I did was I copied our documentation to GPT and I asked it, can you please give me this documentation in a compressed format that is optimal for another LLM, and this is it. And now it works. So I will show you how I do it. So first, what else do I have in my configuration? I have everything on auto here. I actually didn't put in my OpenAPI key. I have some cursor rules. I'm not using this one. It was just an experiment. I'm using this one where I'm telling it, hey, you're an expert data engineer. You're gonna use the REST API source from dltHub. Please use this, like not something else. Don't try to write random Python code because it will do that. Create resources, create authentication, data path, pagination info, incremental loading, basically all those things that we were mentioning before. Some more details for how it should work, basically. And now basically we have these things here. So I can add context and I can add, here we go. I had this added already, it's just wrong name because I renamed it to manual so it's clear. Okay, I have our documentation. I don't actually need Airbyte documentation for this. So I'm just going to go to this empty file and go to this chat and tell it, hey, can you please, because it's nice to be nice, look at Airbyte Guardian YML. And I already got an API key, so I can test this. So we can just run it once the LLM creates it. And create a REST API pipeline in our DLT. In our Python file. So let's see what it will do now. This is a very simple API, so just using this as the simplest example. Of course, it might perform differently on more complex ones, but you know, this is what I'm using as a starting example, and then I will go through different complexities and see how that works. So it gave us some code. Let's look at this code. It looks reasonable. And this is I don't know why it's doing this. It's doing a very complex print, but hey, so let's try to run it. Well, damn, it worked from the first try. So let's see if there is any, yes, incremental is set. Everything is set. Wow, honestly, I'm a little surprised because it usually took one or two, you know, like it would error here and I would give it the error and then it would fix it. But hey, it just did it now. So, you know, guys, stop wasting time, just try it.